Hey guys, let's add some texture to your custom epoxy tumblers. Your secret ingredient is going to be tin foil. You're going to scrunch it all up, and the more you scrunch, the more texture you're going to get. Then you're going to unscrunch that foil and you're going to lay it out flat. Now remember, don't press down too much or you're going to smooth out all the texture that you just created. Make sure your tumbler has been sanded before you begin the next step. Sanding the tumbler helps get a really good grip of the cup to the tin foil. Coat the entire cup with permanent bond spray adhesive. Permanent bond is very important to use here. You don't want to use repositionable. I add 2 to 3 quick coats to make sure you have maximum coverage and tackiness, and then I will wrap the tin foil around the tumbler. Peel away any excess foil and discard it. Use bits and pieces to press to the bottom of the tumbler. Then you're going to take a sharp craft knife and slide it around the top of the tumbler to remove the extra from the top. This works best if you fold the top down inside the cup and push the knife around on the edge. Once you finish that step, you're going to spray paint the base color of your choice. I chose white, so it's going to end up looking kind of like ice and snow for the finished result. This technique can be used in all sorts of ways to achieve unique styles and vastly different final projects depending on the color that you spray paint it, or if you wrap all of the cup or part of the cup. All right guys, now let's add our glitter. I'm going to use fine white opal glitter. This is from our collection. It's called Beau, B-E-A-U. I'm going to put that on the entire surface and apply it using permanent bond spray adhesive. It's the same spray adhesive we use to apply the tin foil. It's important to note that if you use chunky glitter, it's going to totally hide the texture, so fine is the most appropriate glitter to use. Just sprinkle it on over the spray adhesive, then take firm pressure with your finger and rub it down. That's going to give you a beautiful shimmer in the glitter instead of a sparkle. This technique is called burnishing, and it can be seen in many of my other videos. Next, I'm going to work with a white shattered glitter and some UV resin. This is going to lay on more texture and give it more visible dimension. UV resin gets its name because it cures under a UV light. It is a 1-part resin, so you don't have to mix anything. You just apply it and then stick it underneath a light. You can also use natural sunshine, but I tend to prefer a UV nail lamp or a UV flashlight. The natural sunlight takes about 45 minutes to cure, but the lamp and the light take only about 1.5 minutes. I found my light online, and you can also find them in beauty supply stores. So what you see me doing is applying the UV resin, pressing the shattered glitter onto it, and then setting it under the UV light to cure. My goal is to make this cup look like a cracked glacier ice cap, so I'm making veins of shattered glitter in just various places around the tumbler. Now we're going to start adding alcohol inks to define the texture and make it pop. I'm using my burnishing tool to just add the alcohol inks right on top of that shattered glitter. Now I'm using blending solution to soften out those outer edges. Now we're going to use some silicone tools and some detailing tools to apply gold foil as detail. I'm using UV resin again to apply it. I use 2 pieces of a pool noodle rubber banded together to hold it steady while I work on it. Once we have it all set, we take one last glance around the tumbler to make sure it's ready to be epoxied and no big giant pieces are sticking out or sharp. That way it covers easily with the epoxy. We did a full coat of clear gloss spray paint over the surface of the tumbler to hold all the glitter and gold foil in place while we apply our epoxy. I'm using Little Leon Rose Tumbler Epoxy from iwantglitter.com. It's mixed equal parts in a 1-to-1 ratio. I'm using probably about 15 to 16 grams of epoxy to get a nice coat. Make sure to wear nitrile gloves, wear a VOC respirator, and you can see here I'm using a silicone tool to apply the epoxy. Epoxy is self-leveling, so you want to work with what is called a tumbler turner. You can see it here. It's a machine that you put your cup on and it keeps the tumbler spinning in a rotation so that the epoxy can self-level and it won't drip off the bottom and you'll get a nice, beautiful, glossy coat. For this step, you want to make sure that epoxy is cured up for about 12 hours before handling the cup. You don't want to leave any fingerprints or have any soft spots on your tumbler. As you can see, I'm using a little pair of nail clippers, and any sharp points from that shatter glitter that are sticking up, I'm just trimming them down. That way the next layer of epoxy will give us a nice coating over the top. We won't have any rough spots. I'm also going to sand it down gently with 220 grit sandpaper. You want to make sure you use a 220 grit sandpaper or finer, because if you sand too much, you're going to sand straight through that epoxy and the glitter into the metal, and that's not going to be easy to fix. When you're sanding an epoxy tumbler, make sure to wear a dust mask so you don't inhale any of the dust that comes off from the epoxy. Make sure to wash your tumbler with soap and water in between the sanding and the next layer of epoxy, and make sure it's completely dry before you go to add your next layer of epoxy. Now it's time to add that heavy final coat of epoxy. After applying the final coat, make sure to let it cure a full 72 hours before using. After the 72 hours, it's ready to rock and roll. I hope this week's tutorial inspired you guys to get out there and try something new with your tumblers. I hope you were able to pick up a few tips and maybe tricks on working with epoxy and epoxy tumblers. And I'll see you guys here next week for another tutorial.